This demo is not only a great way to see how we might draw spiky plants, but it's also a great example of what it means to draw the effect of detail with a subject that has a huge amount of detail, particularly but not exclusively suited to nature scenes, in a way that we can capture the overall feel of the detail rather than having to draw it all, because it's not about simplifying the actual subject, it's about simplifying the visual detail so the overall effect appears to be the same, we read it the same or similar to all the detail, but without us having to draw it. And the irony is, it often looks more realistic than when we try and draw all the detail. Now, first, we have to carefully observe our reference in life or in a photo for any details that are closer, which are the closest things we see, which are in front of the massive detail. Because we have to make sure that we, if you like, reserve the paper for that. And so it's often helpful to draw those first, and that's what I've done here towards the base. And it's also what I'm doing now with these larger leaves that come up where we basically see the whole leaf or most of the leaf, most of the spike. And we draw them first. Now, we're going to be putting lots of lines on the paper quickly soon, so we need to make sure that these closer details are there so that we can avoid them when we start doing that. So the pace certainly picks up when we draw the effect of detail. The first, the closer things, the more considered things, the things that the eyes are going to land on and see more easily, we need to make sure that they're drawn with a greater control, a greater observation. And then we need to study the form. See, even though this plant is a number of spiky leaves, it's also roughly a three-dimensional ball of spikes. And we're going to want this sense of three dimensions of the overall plant to come through at the end too. We don't want it to be a series of flat, two-dimensional upright spikes, as if it's more like a fan. And that's a very common mistake I see when I see drawings of plants such as this. It ends up looking more like a fan than a ball. So we're largely going to create this three-dimensional shape, both by having some of the spikes that are coming towards us a different shape to the ones that go straight up, but also from the values, from the lights and darks, particularly the darks, particularly the shade and the shadow. We want it to, in a generalized sense, reflect the light direction. But because this isn't a smooth surface like a ball, because it is a lot of spikes, that complicates things as well. Thirdly, we need to do we don't need to, but I find it helpful to do a rough outline, and you can see me almost finishing that here. Now I've gone a bit large, I got a bit excited with the spikes, but that's not going to affect things at all. So we observe a few key spikes, we carefully draw them, and we also need to be careful with the natural detail spread. We need to capture a sense of randomness in most nature scenes, even where there's approximately an evenness. Nature usually does have uneven gaps, and if we're not careful, if we just keep drawing, we'll fill these gaps in. So again, there's a point where we need to just stop and slow down and let these random gaps remain. If we're not careful, we'll easily and quickly fill them all in. If you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button for me. Fourthly, a lot of this will be created by values, the very dark areas, and the silhouettes that these areas create. So very important to pay attention to these in the reference. And so there's some of the first things you actually see me start doing now in terms of value. There's a lot of mid-value here. If we were to grayscale this, take all the color out, there'd be an awful lot of gray that's very much the same. And we can't afford to get too bogged down trying to do hatching for the individual spikes. There's just too many. And so these very dark areas become key to establishing the what I think of as the visual meaning. Values and shapes and line work that lets us identify quickly what we're looking at and how we're looking at it, that let us read meaning into this scene. So paying really careful attention to the darkest areas, because I also then won't be so easily tempted to render other areas as dark as this. I know these will be the darkest, these real little dark black spots deep within the center of the plant where the light's not reaching. I know these will be the darkest areas, so I can establish them confidently basically as black, and now I can use them to judge the relative values of all the rest of the hatching that I'm doing. Now, I start the hatching by hatching on specific spikes, but what I want to do is very quickly stop doing that, and then in combination with that, to start to hatch sometimes more the overall region of this three-dimensional ball. So it's going to be this combination back and forth. Now you can see me doing some overall hatching. Back and forth, back and forth. I'm going to be broadly hatching areas to a greater degree in some parts than others, and this will, I hope, help create this three-dimensional shape, because I'll be generally doing more of these overall hatching lines towards the bottom of the plant where overall less light is able to reach. But I'll also be continuing then to refine over the top of these generalized hatching lines, individual spike hatching, to both highlight individual leaves so that they don't get lost in the hatching lines, and also to start to just create the variability of values so that some parts stand out more than others. So back and forth at the reference, trying to keep making sure what we're doing in our drawing with our hatching is anchored in our reference photo. But of course, remember, the photo is only the starting point of our drawing, and particularly in this case, where a lot of the values are similar, but in the photo, the color actually helps us see what's what. We don't have that color in our drawing, so we certainly will need to adjust the values a bit to help create the clarity that the color provides that we don't have in our drawing. And I should be aware, now you're watching this actually at double speed, so this took me about, I think, 27 minutes to draw in real time. And don't get discouraged by how long it may start to establish the drawing at the start. Maybe in the first 60% of the total drawing time, we'll get a lot less than 60% of the marks on the paper, because the tempo does start to pick up towards the end. Now, there are moments where we do need to slow it down to do particular detail, but as I said, there is a rhythm, and we need to just have that patience at the start while we're establishing things. And this is the case almost always in drawing the effect of detail. Seventh point here, vary the line weight of the ink on the paper, both by the speed with which we draw it and the pressure that we apply. In nature, we have great variety. We want to create great variety in our mark making to capture the variety of impact of what we see. So we want to introduce this by varying the marks as much as we can. Eighth, we need to be very aware of line direction with our hatching, as well as creating value. By controlling the direction of our hatching, we can introduce clarity between different parts of our scene, different objects that we hatch in different directions. We've got the main plant, we've got two types of smaller plants off to the lower left. We've got the wood chips, we've got shade and shadows, which is a different type of value to what's happening on the plants, and so forth. So always being aware of the line direction is important. Now, I do have a playlist on drawing the effect of detail with a huge range of examples of different subjects. Obviously trees, but also crowds of people, grass, bricks on a wall, tiles, architectural decoration. This is an incredibly useful technique to develop, and I think it's more easily understood if we can see demonstrations in a wide range of subjects. It's not just a way of drawing nature, although because of the abundance of detail in nature, it's, I think, essential to try and capture a realistic sense of nature. But it's actually just a really great drawing technique, useful in many subjects. Think of hair in a portrait. That's exactly what we do with hair. We draw the effect of the detail, not the detail. It's like seeing the overall wholeness of something before we let ourselves see the detail. It's partly training our eyes to see differently, to not actually see the detail, to try not to see this as blades of grass or leaves on a tree or individual spikes coming up from a central core, but to see it as an overall effect and then find ways we can create that overall effect. When I look at this spiky plant, I see it as a whole bunch of spikes. I actually don't see the individual spikes particularly unless I start to concentrate on them. And that's what I want to do in my drawing. I want to draw the overall effect. If you look at my drawing, the dark areas, the lighter areas, the tops of spiky leaves, very few of those actually join up consistently because they don't need to. It's creating the effect that they could join up, that they probably join up, when in fact they don't. And this is what lets us create the effect. We don't get bogged down in absolute consistency, but it's all the elements that we need to see it as credible, to see it as real. And we can do that far more quickly and easily than actually doing it all in detail. Incredibly useful technique to master. And if you haven't hit the like button, please do it now for me. The irony is that we end up with drawings that I think far more capture a sense of reality than if we try and draw the reality. So now what you see me doing is the fine tuning. Now I'm looking at my reference and my drawing and I'm thinking, is it clear? Can I read it easily enough? Do I need to particularly add some more darker values in parts to strengthen what we're seeing? And also perhaps just some lines. Do I need to emphasize some of the spiky leaf edges with heavier lines drawn over the top of the lines I've drawn earlier? I don't want to get too bogged down with lines because if we have an emphasis on outline, it can make things look a bit cartoon-like. But strengthening some of the lines chosen carefully can really give greater clarity to what we're seeing without any risk of drawing too much detail. So very close to the end now, just doing these fine-tuning marks. Again, with these, we need to show a lot of restraint or we'll end up putting too much value over too much of it. And now we've lost the clarity. We've passed the clarity and gone back to too much of the sameness. And notice I'm creating distinction with just a few of these spiky leaves as well, so that we can see them more clearly, especially the front ones. And well, that's it then. What do you think? Drawn, of course, with a 0.1mm uni pen. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting. Hope you give it a go. You'll find the reference on my channel community page, or the post page as it's called now. So please give it a go. But in the end, whatever you draw, whatever techniques you use to draw it, whatever you draw it with, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.